I have no idea what Rebel Moon is and if it's based off of anything or not. Either way, I went in completely blind when watching this film, and my first impression of it was that it was overwhelming and underwhelming at the same time. This movie is a little over 2 hours long, and the majority of the runtime consists of hopping from one setting to another collecting characters. There is so much going on with this film that the best way I can think to explain it all would be to break it down into sections rather than going through the film chronologically. With that said, please remember that this is my unprofessional opinions, and if you like the film, that's great. I'm glad this film is being appreciated. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and first dive into the story of Rebel Moon. If you have ever watched Seven Samurai, The Magnificent Seven, or even A Bug's Life, then you've technically already watched Rebel Moon. It's more or less the same premise. If you haven't watched any of these, let me explain the story real quick. A village of mostly farmers is being bullied by an influential individual with hired guns. The villagers are terrified, but one of them decides enough is enough and goes out to find hired guns themselves that will liberate them. That's a simplified version of these films. Obviously, each one goes about retelling the story in a different fashion. I have no problem with this. There are so many different iterations of Cinderella in so many different medias that I doubt one would be able to live long enough to consume it all. Not to mention, each iteration brings their own unique spin that keeps the story interesting. One of my favorite adaptations of Cinderella is Ever After with Drew Barrymore in Disney's 1997 musical version with Brandy and Whitney Houston. It's a really fun film. With all that said, my issue with Rebel Moon isn't necessarily the story, but Zack Snyder's execution of it. Due to the story taking place in space, the characters travel from one planet to another to collect warriors they want to hire. The hunting down of these warriors is very fast-paced, which kinda comes off like a speedrun of Pokemon or Mario. You don't really learn anything about the planet or the town they're in, and none of the environment is unique or memorable. They do show the name of the planet on screen, but it feels so irrelevant because we don't stay there for too long and we never go back to those places. This reminds me of Raya and the Last Dragon and how Raya would travel to the different regions of Kamandra only to collect the gem there and then move on. It also doesn't help that most of the environment looks similar to each other. There's one scene that I can distinctly tell apart, and that's only because it looks like it came from a Western film. What's really annoying is that they didn't really try to make it look like an alien Western world, and the same can be said about the other places the characters visited. There's nothing visually new in this film. I've already seen these sci-fi cyberpunk environments in other movies, such as Blade Runner, Guardians of the Galaxy, Star Wars, and The Fifth Element. What's even more disappointing is that each of these films brought something visually different that distinguishes themselves from other films. Rebel Moon, not so much. This may sound cliche as but James Cameron's Avatar did it better. Not just the alien world or the alien designs, but also the machinery was unique as well, in my opinion. Now let's talk about the villains, aka the Imperium soldiers that serve the Motherworld. They're Nazis. There's no other way to describe them. Obviously, Nazi ideology is one of the most evil things on this planet, but my god, why is this a default setting when it comes to sci-fi villains? It's overused, unoriginal, and it makes it look like they didn't even try. What's even worse is that the tone of this film is very serious, but I had a hard time taking the villains seriously because their performance was so over the top. They're apparently supposed to be brainwashed soldiers that believe they're better than everyone else, but there's this inconsistency there, specifically with Eris's character, which we'll get to in a moment. Their behavior reduces them down to caricatures, meaning it was obvious they were going to die because of how over the top they were. Now let's talk about Eris. I hate to bring this part up, but out of all the soldiers that are stationed at that village, only one of them appears to be of a different ethnicity, and they just happen to be the only decent person of that entire regiment, which means they're the only soldier that Korra doesn't kill. I feel like I could overlook this if we were given some insight into Eris's character, whose morals was still intact. However, we don't. We basically don't hear from him ever again after this scene, which is a shame because this could have been a great opportunity to have Korra interrogate him, which leads to revealing parts of her past. I'm very curious about the robot Jimmy. He comes off very sentient, which gives me Ghost in the Shell vibes. This really has me curious about his mechanism, and if there's a second movie, I hope we get to learn more about what he is. I've addressed all that I want to say about the villains, so now let's talk about the characters, starting with Korra's character is an interesting one. She's a former Imperium soldier, and from what the film tells us, she was in a shipwreck and the farmers took her in. So far, it's a decent character setup. However, we later learn that she's a deserter, and I personally would have preferred if they went down the route of her being nursed back to health by the farmers, and their kindness is what started to change her. The reason I say this is because when Korra talks about her backstory, not only does she acknowledge that she was raised in a harsh environment, but it's revealed that she was fully indoctrinated into the Mother World's way of thinking. And yet, somehow, she reformed herself, which is not explained in the movie, and decides to desert her post. In the flashback, we see that she had a lover, and when she lost that lover, that could have been used to trigger a change in her mindset, but nope, she continues to fight. When it came to Korra's role within the village, it's clear that for the most part she's been accepted by them and even has a fling with one of them, Din. However, when Korra reveals her true nature, so to speak, the villagers for the most part don't really react. Even when she was ringing the bell, which I assume is there to signal for danger, there's not much of a reaction. They're just standing around. That's another issue I have with this film as a whole, is the lack of reaction and responses from the characters. Now back to Korra. The line in this scene has been nagging at me.
We're gonna have to fight.
This line tells me, the audience, that Korra is the one that wants to fight, and this is her telling the farmers that they have no choice now but to fight. However, we know that she is the one that doesn't want to fight. In fact, she had a whole conversation prior with Hagen, who's trying to convince her to stay and fight. Instead, I think it would have been more appropriate if she was inadvertently speaking directly to Hagen by saying something similar to this. Okay, we fight. This response would be more fitting in my opinion because she's continuing their conversation, a conversation she hasn't had with anyone else in the village. If Korra had spoken up when they were having their town hall meeting and she proposed the idea of them fighting but they all turned her down, the line from the movie would have made better sense. But since she didn't and only talked to Hagen, that line doesn't fit the narrative that was set up. When she reveals her past to Gunnar, I hated it. The way I think Zack Snyder should have opened the film was have the narration while showing images of Korra in battle and being victorious. Then it cuts to her on the ship and something happens via explosion or whatnot, which leads to the ship going down, and then it cuts to Korra in the wreckage. She's picked up and carried away, and then it cuts to her in present time. I know that sounds basic, but it's effective to get several points across without Korra over-explaining it to us.
On the Mother World, 1,000 kings ruled unchallenged in succession. But in the royal bloodline's lust for power, they consumed everything upon their planet. The realm marched its armies into the vastness of space, conquering everything in its path. The glory of the Mother World seemed without end until the assassin's blade struck down the king and queen, severing the royal bloodline forever. Several conquered planets on the edge of the Mother World's reach began to whisper of revolution. Belisarius used the opportunity to seize power, declaring himself regent. As a show of strength, he sent his most brutal commander into the outer reaches of the Mother World's dominion to find and crush without mercy those who would call themselves rebel.
I particularly didn't care for how she narrated her life story. She never described how she was feeling within the moments that are shown to us. Instead, we are bluntly explained what is being shown, even though we can deduce it for ourselves. Here are some examples of what I mean.
Belisarius killed my entire family and took me with him. I don't know why he spared me. Why, of the hundreds of thousands that died at his hands, he chose me to live.
Belarius killed my people, my family, and took me in as his own. Why me of all people? I had no idea, but I hated him for it.
They gave me the name Archelaus. Began my training and education in the histories of the Mother World. And for 5 years I lived on that ship with its soldiers who were my only family. No softness, only the hard lessons of war.
He gave me a new name, a new place to call home, a place that only had hard lessons to give, and I thrived in it.
And I was his child. I was his protege. I was his student. I was one of them. Daughter of a decorated commander. Friend to the king and the royal family, living a life of privilege.
I was best known as Belarius' daughter, friend to the royal family, which granted me a life of privilege, and for a time, I actually thanked the Mother World for what it did to my home, my family, for what it made me into. Do you get the idea? Her voiceover sounded as if she was narrating her biography rather than having a conversation. Also, those sound effects in the battle sequence made it hard to hear her sometimes. The rewrites, in my opinion, better captures Korra's mindset throughout these different parts of her life, and this could also hint that she may not be as reformed as she appears to be. Which leads to my next issue with her character. How can I explain this? She doesn't necessarily talk negatively about the mother world. She does mention the horrible things they do, but doesn't necessarily chastise them. Even when she talks about her adopted father, she kinda sympathizes with him. Which leads to the next issue I have with Korra. She talks about honor and uses that to convince people to fight on her side, but at no point is it ever brought up that her perception of honor comes from the destructive ideology of the mother world. There is this one scene that kinda addresses it.
What happened to honor?
What did happen to it?
Piece of shit.
This could have been a compelling conversation about the characters' different perceptions of honor, where they learned it, who they learned it from, and how they came to their conclusion of it. That's why I would prefer a more direct approach to the subject, especially since it could benefit Korra's character development. Because let's not forget, this woman was literally about to leave and let her friend be R-worded by a group of men. Which in my opinion reveals that her perception of honor is not as righteous as she believes it to be, and the journey of her collecting all these different warriors would have been a great opportunity for her to realize this. It's so disheartening that this wasn't a focal point within the movie, because this is an extremely interesting concept for a character. Zuko from the Avatar and the Last Airbender is a prime example of this concept being done successfully. When Korra and the rest of the group are captured, I thought we were finally going to get an explanation about her gun. When Korra left the village, she's given a gun that she believed to have been lost in the wreckage. Given how the camera lingers on the gun and how Korra reacts to seeing it, I assume that there's something unique about it. When Korra uses the gun in the saloon, there's nothing special about it at all. It fires the same way as the rest of the guns in the movie. When Atticus sees it, I figured now we were going to get an explanation on why it was so special. No, he tosses it aside as if it's a piece of trash. So I'm left wondering what the was the importance of the gun, and apparently there is none. I get it if they want to leave a little mystery for the next part of the story, but this is not how you do it, especially when that mystery is introduced so early into the movie. In the final fight between Korra and Atticus, I truly wish they ended it with her swinging the cane similar to how Atticus had been doing, indicating that she's not fully broken free from their hold on her, and how this could be a problem later in the movies. I was really looking forward to that because I figured that was how this guy was going to die, because they put some emphasis on the shots he did this in. When the fight is over, I have such an issue with the lack of reaction from the other characters. They know who she is now and what she's done, and instead of being cautious around her and maybe questioning her motives or allegiance, they basically all resume their quest. I ask you, in all honesty, if this was taking place right after World War II had ended, how many of you would actually trust your neighbor if you found out that they were a former Nazi soldier? I ask, would you be able to look past that, or would you just not be able to see your neighbor the same way again? This is another missed opportunity, in my opinion, for Korra's character to be humbled because she does come off a little prideful, which I don't mind as long as it leads to character growth. This could have been a great scene of her swallowing her pride and asking them not to turn their backs on the farmers because of her. The reason I keep addressing potential character growth is because Korra's character growth starts and ends close to the beginning of the film when she decides to stay and help the villagers. After that, she pretty much stays the same throughout the film. I think we've talked enough about Korra and her flaws. Now it's time to talk about the other characters and their flaws. When it comes to the side characters, we don't really learn anything about them until the end of the film, and it's Kai who reveals their backstories, and then right after him, Atticus, the bad guy, basically repeats what Kai just said. Talk about beating the audience over the head, why don't you? It comes off very lazy in my opinion. While there's not much to talk about when it comes to the actual characters, I still want to talk about them individually, so let's start from the beginning. Now let's talk about Hagen's character. I'm getting surrogate father vibes from him, which would be a decent setup to compare the two parental figures in Korra's life, similar to Zuko. How one parental figure is stern and harsh while the other is patient and kind, and how these opposite influences affect the individual. That would be a terrific setup if they had gone down the route of Korra being reformed by an outside force. However, she wasn't and magically reformed herself. Gunnar is the one with the most personality in my opinion. He starts off being the classic side character to the main character. At first, I didn't really like him, especially when he insisted that they work with the Imperiums, and I definitely didn't like him when he caused the death of Sindri, the village chief. However, as the movie progressed, he kinda grew on me. Firstly, his character didn't do anything else stupid while they were recruiting warriors, which was appreciated. Secondly, he assisted in getting the child out of danger, which I liked. However, I do have a criticism with that. Why the hell didn't he just pick up the kid? He's a grown-ass man and that's a tiny child. It would have made more sense for him to pick up the kid and run from the danger. I made the same complaint in my Fixing Obi-Wan Kenobi videos. Why are the adults not picking up the children anymore and running away from the danger with them? Anyway, by the end of the film, Gunnar's character wasn't incompetent and was somewhat useful, which redeemed him in my eyes. I'm not sure how I feel about the reveal of him being in love with Cora. I think what annoys me about it is that the word love is being misused. There is a distinct difference between liking someone and being in love with that person. I think love gets used way too much to explain someone's feelings towards another person when there are different stages of affection people have towards each other. At best, I would describe Gunnar having a crush on Cora. Last thing I want to address about Gunnar is his transition from farmer to killer. I have no issue with this. I just would have liked to have visually seen that progression. I don't really recall his character participating in any serious fights prior to the main battle that warrant such a big change from him. Again, I think this all goes back to the lack of character interaction. Maybe at the saloon, if he had frozen during the fight and Cora sternly explains to him that this is only the beginning, that would set up for him to want and need to change, which would make better sense of his actions when he assisted Nemesis and eventually killed Kai in order to save Cora. Speaking of Kai, he was an interesting character that I really liked throughout the film. In fact, I'd say that he's my favorite character in this entire movie, and I think part of the reason was because, like Gunnar, he had some personality to him. He had a charisma about him, which was unfortunate given how his story ended. I didn't mind his double cross, especially since it made sense given he conveniently knew the location of all the warriors they wanted to hire. My only real criticism would be that I would have preferred that Kai slowly revealed the atrocities he experienced as a kid to Cora throughout the film, showing how much hate and distrust he has, not just towards the Imperiums, which could have hinted at his ulterior motives. Now let's talk about Tarak. First of all, I think it's pretty clear that he's supposed to be the indigenous member of the group. Secondly, I can't help but feel that he's also supposed to be the eye candy of the group as well. Thirdly, I don't know how I feel about the whole Griffin scene, given that it doesn't go anywhere, at least in the first movie. It could pay off in the second movie, who knows. Lastly, I don't know if it was necessary that this guy got killed by the Griffin. His character was an ass for putting a chain on Tarak, but I wouldn't call him evil. In the end, he honored the bet and let them go without trying to swindle them. If he did try to double cross them, then yeah, let the Griffin gouge the motherfucker's eyes out. With that said, I can't think of anything else to mention. We literally learn nothing about Tarak's character until the very end with that giant info dump and we find out that he's a prince. That information serves no purpose within this movie and no one addresses this to him again, which again confirms what I've been saying about the characters having a lack of reaction. Now on to Nemesis. She has absolutely no personality, she's extremely stiff, and I don't know if this was intentional because her character is a cyborg. When she fights that spider creature, she uses swords that visually look similar to lightsabers. Obviously this was intentional because lightsabers are eye candy, and I will admit it looked cool. However, I found the fight problematic due to the fact that no one steps in to help Nemesis when it looks like she's losing, and it's Gunnar of all people that has no combat experience that steps in to help her. Cora is trying to recruit this woman, so logically it would be in her best interest to assist Nemesis, if only to give her a better incentive to agree to Cora's offer. When the fight is over, Tarak compliments her and Nemesis goes all Nateri on him.
Ah! Damn!
You don't thank for this.
She makes it clear that death is not to be complimented on. This could have been a great opportunity to show the difference in these two characters' cultures by having Tarak explain how his people view battles and victories. But nope, I don't think the writers thought that far ahead. At the end, it is confirmed that she was a mother but lost her children. I cannot state enough what a missed opportunity this movie is and what a disservice it does to its characters. This reveal, if done right, could have elevated Nemesis' character by having her stern exterior soften as she reveals what she has lost to the Imperiums. She did hint at it when she was talking to the spider creature, which was a good start, but then they just unloaded it with that big info dump at the end. Also, this could have been a good moment of reflection for Cora because she was once a Imperium soldier who may have inadvertently caused the death of innocent families, similar to Thorfinn in Vinland Saga. Now onto General Titus. Like Cora, he too is a former Imperium soldier, which made his desertion a greater disgrace. They find him in a Spartan-like arena, and it turns out that he's there to punish himself for the death of his soldiers. So far so good, until Cora talks to him, and honestly, it does not take much to convince him to join her. Which is hilarious because at the saloon where Cora first gets information of his whereabouts, it's stated that he kills people who disturb him from his endless punishment, but nothing comes from that information. Also, I don't mean any disrespect to the actress that plays Cora, but when she tries to be inspiring, specifically when she raises her voice, it just does not come out right.
I am beyond redemption.
I have no time for pity! But commerce or not, his people toil with their bare hands to grow the grain that fed you! All of you! And because of that transaction, their village is now threatened by Admiral Noble. in pursuit of your revolution.
I don't know if there's some kind of setting up going on here, but Nemesis is against killing for revenge, and yet Cora persuades Titus to join them by promising him revenge. Revenge and justice are often two words that get mixed and muddied together, and I don't know if that's what's going on here, or if this is a strategic play on words. One more thing, for whatever reason, it is repeated multiple times that Titus is a gifted general, and again, nothing comes of that information in this movie. Finally, we get to Darien Bloodaxe. He's one of the leaders of the rebellion along with his sister Derva, and he decides to join Cora because Gunnar supplied them with food prior to the movie. I like that there's some actual convincing to be done to get them to agree to fight for them. So far so good, but again, we can't have nice writing in this movie. Darien was the last guy to join and was on screen for maybe about 15 minutes before he died. I can't tell if this was done to avoid criticism for not killing off characters. There are plenty of shows and movies that have been criticized for not killing their characters off, and when they do, they don't keep them dead for too long. I will admit that Darien's final battle was an epic send-off, but I have not spent an appropriate amount of time with this character to feel what is expected of me to feel for when characters die. Which is a shame because his character, like every other character in this movie, has potential, and I feel that his potential could have been as a contrast to Cora. She's a disciplined soldier, while to my knowledge, he is self-taught. That could have been a great butting of heads between these two, and maybe even with Titus as well. Lastly, this girl, who I can't remember her name and I don't feel like looking it up, is given a moment on screen to talk about what she's lost when Darien died, and here I am thinking, what was the point? Why do I need to know this right now as the movie's about to end? Now that we've gotten through all the characters that I cared to mention, let's talk about... When it comes to fight scenes, I love the spectacle of them. While I'm not an expert by any means, I think some of the best fight scenes are the fast-paced ones. It feels more real, and the less cuts within the fights adds on to that authenticity. John Wick is proof of that. Also, Obi-Wan versus Darth Maul. That fight is legendary and the most critically acclaimed fight within the Star Wars films due to its fast-paced nature. When it comes to the fights within this film, it visually looks scripted. I noticed this specifically with Cora's fights. If you look away from the fights and look at the other characters, they're literally standing around waiting for their cue, which heavily reminds me of M. Night Shyamalan's Avatar movie. It also doesn't help with the convincing of the realism within these fights when it's constantly slowed down. It can be used effectively when used sparingly. Justice League is proof of that. It was funny and scary as hell when the Flash saw that Superman could see him at full speed. That was slow motion done effectively, however, Zack Snyder overuses it in this film and it just got repetitive. If I'm being honest, I think he used it too early half the time as well. With the fight between Nemesis and the spider, the fight is slowed down when Nemesis is dodging the spider's leg. The reason I don't like this shot is because the slow motion was used too early. At the very least, let the leg get a little closer and get a close-up shot so we can see just how close the tip gets to her face. That, in my opinion, would better emphasize the danger and consequences if she's too slow. Looking back, I feel that my biggest issue with these fights is with Cora. I don't like the shot of her charging, it doesn't look good, and the slow motion does not do it any favors. The fight between her and Atticus could have been a cool one, but again, it visually looks scripted because whenever Cora is positioning herself or doing something to Atticus, you can literally see the actor that plays Atticus standing, waiting for her. That 1 second of him not moving ruins the seriousness of the fight and takes me out of it because it reminds me that it's scripted. Also, this dude punches Cora in the face, but at no point do we see any blood on her. Meanwhile, this guy is all messed up. I get that they want her aesthetically pleasing for her victory pose, but when a character, specifically the main character, is bloodied by the end of their fight, it makes their victory feel more well earned. I said this before in my Mulan video. Most of this video has been me criticizing this film, so let's change it up and talk about things that I did like within this film. First up, Nemesis's outfit. I liked it. It reminded me of the sister's outfit from Kubo and the Two Strings, and it was unique compared to everyone else's outfit. Secondly, the wooden cane. The character Atticus would take a wooden cane and ceremoniously bludgeon someone with it. From my understanding, this is a form of punishment when someone insults a high-ranking Imperium officer. I like that because it gives insight into their culture because bad guys need culture too. Without some type of cultural identity, characters good or bad are not as interesting. In the movie, The Chronicles of Riddick, the villain's culture is their motivation to colonize and conquer, and it was a very intriguing belief system that they had. Now that I'm thinking about it, I do see some similarities. Another thing that this film did really well showcasing was the farmers' ignorance. After the Imperiums came and made their demands, the farmers try to cope with their new reality by convincing themselves how inviolable they are and insist that their skill set will prevent any serious harm befalling them as a group.
He's right. Farming. That is our skill. That we can do. That they cannot.
Yes.
If we show them how good we are, they will be forced to spare us.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Do we agree? Our work fights for us.
Yes.
Our work fights for us. Yes? We settle them. We show them how valuable we are. And when we have fulfilled our side of the deal, they will be forced to rethink how much food they leave us. Yeah. We can appeal to those gentlemen in the granary, appeal to their humanity.
They must.
As for Cora, the look on her face tells you that this is not the case. This surprisingly reminded me of Schindler's List, that had a very similar scene. If I remember correctly, a group of women talk about rumors of gas being used as a new method of killing, and they cope with this new information by convincing themselves that they're an invaluable workforce despite the fact that they've been subjugated to a concentration camp. This is one of the better scenes in the whole film, in my opinion.
SS gave them soap. They told them to breathe all the time because it's good for disinfecting. And then they gassed them. But Mila, why soaps? So that they would agree to go in, I think.
Come on, Mila, stop it. No, it can't be true. We are very, very important for them.
Yeah, me too now. Good night.
When it comes to the Griffin, I particularly didn't care for it because it didn't go anywhere and it didn't do anything to the current story. However, I did like this little bit. The look on the Griffin's face and then the look on Tarak's face when he realizes what it was planning, this was fun. It reminded me of this scene from Spirit. It's unfortunate that this didn't go anywhere, but it was nice. I feel that CGI animals don't get to have too much expression unless they're animated or are in 3D cartoon style, similar to How to Train Your Dragon, which reminds me, let's hope that when the live action movie comes out, they figure out a way to let the dragons keep their expressions because that was a big part of the charm of the original movies. Overall, this wasn't a bad film. Was it a good one? I would say it was a okay film. This film felt more like a spectacle than an actual story being told, and if I'm being brutally honest, I think that the spectacle took precedence over the story and the characters. I think the characters suffered the most due to the pacing, which makes me believe that this story would have been more successful if it was a series. Specifically to give the characters more time to develop and get to know each other. Also, there's a handful of things that happen in this film that feels irrelevant to the current story being told, and I can't help but think that those things was being set up for the next film, and I personally don't like that. I don't mind foreshadowing, in fact I love it because it lets me know that the creators are putting some serious thought into the story. However, it still should be relevant to the current story being told. I think Kill Bill, Harry Potter, and the Lord of the Rings movies are good examples of foreshadowing being done well. Despite being part of a bigger story, each film decently stands on their own as an individual film. While there is foreshadowing, it doesn't feel irrelevant to the current story being told. In Rebel Moon, it emphasizes that Korra and Din is in a physical relationship, but there's no on-screen interaction between these two, which leaves me wondering, is that being pushed aside for the next film? Also, the gun. There was some emphasis put on that as well, but again, nothing came of it, making it irrelevant. Then there was the Griffin. It was used as a plot device in that moment, but after that, it was irrelevant. I'd even go as far as to say that the fight with the spider was irrelevant because it didn't affect Nemesis' decision one way or the other when joining Korra. In the third Harry Potter movie, Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry befriends a hippogriff named Buckbeak. Due to that friendship, Harry is able to save Buckbeak's life and then use him to break his godfather, Sirius Black, out of prison. The hippogriff was relevant throughout the entire film. Was he relevant in the other films? No, but at least he was relevant throughout the film that he was in, which I can't exactly say the same for the Griffin. I know I've been a lot about the Griffin, and the reason for that, because it feels like it was in the movie for the spectacle of it and not for the relevancy. From what I heard, Zack Snyder went about pitching this film to studios in a similar fashion to Star Wars, Samurais in Space, which sounds like he was trying to create his own version of Star Wars, and that is the core issue for the failure of this film in my opinion. There's a difference between taking reference from other works and inserting or altering the concept for your story, to just blatantly copying and pasting it into your story. There's nothing wrong with wanting to write a story with a similar premise to a popular work. If you go into it with the mindset of trying to recreate that popular work based on their success with that concept, you limit yourself within the confines of that already existing work. And I feel like that's what happened with this movie. Zack Snyder had all these ideas that clearly came from other works that he wanted to incorporate into this film and shape the story around all these different ideas instead of altering these different concepts to fit the story. Despite me not liking this film, I hope it does find its audience, and who knows, maybe years from now, it might become a cult classic. Until then, let me know what you think. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Do you agree with me, or do you think I'm way off the mark? Thanks for watching, and like and subscribe!